Hilchos Halacha and Hilchos Lulav. Abbas minim ha'elu. These four species that you take on Sukkahs. The Rambam goes on. We'll go down to the Peirush, which are Shehein Lulav. They are the Lulav, the Hodos, and the Hoda, the myrtle, the Arov, and the willow, the Esrog, and the Esrog. Show you Echad Man Yovesh, if one of them was dried out, or gozel, or stolen, or gonav, or robbed from someone. I guess with strength, Geneva is without strength. Afilu la'achayush, even if the owner has already given up. It was from a tree which was used as idol worship, Hanavedes, and which was once worshipped, even though it's no longer worshipped. So it was from a city that all became did avodah zarah, and the whole city has to be destroyed, and therefore we'll see it's lacking measurement. It is posel to be used for the minim. The Magen Mishnah cites that Yovesh is posel. We find him in a few Mishnayos, Sukkah 29, 32, 33, 34. Rashi says that every min is explained separately because there's something different about it than the others, one of the species. Because the concept of a small lulav, which is brought up on a barren, rocky hillside, is only by a lulav. The leaves should be more than the berries should be more than the leaves. Is only by myrtle, and that it shouldn't have edges. It's only by arova. Orlan Truma is only by esrog. Rae Gann and Rashi explain that when it's dried out, it's posel because it says v'anveyu. It's not considered glorifying Hashem. Shedoshu in Sukkah 11 says it's no lefonov b'mitzvahs. One is supposed to be beautifying himself with mitzvahs, that the mitzvah has to be beautiful. Rae Gann adds another reason, because bring it before HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a beautiful fashion. Just like you don't bring something to a king which is not nice, so you don't keep the mitzvahs in something that's not nice. Yerushalmi says the posel is because it's not alive, and in Hallel we say loy hamesim v'Hallelu. When it's dried out, it's considered that the fruit has died or the tree has died. And that's what the Ravid writes, that it's posel because it's like a dead person. And he adds a reason that you need hoda, it needs to be unique. That we find by esrog is called a hoda. Therefore, all the species need to have their own uniqueness about them, like the Tosha says. So all of the four reasons, would make a dry, if it's dry, it would not be valid to be used. Rambam continues, if it was stolen, even after the owner has given up on it. The Magen Mishnah cites a Mishnah in Sukkah 30a, and the Kesef Mishnah brings from Sukkah 29b. Gozel is posel even in Yom Tov Sheni, because you're doing a mitzvah through a sin which is stealing. Shmuel Omar, that it says it's only posel on the first day because it says it has to be yours. From yours you should take, and not from that which was stolen. And therefore, even if he borrowed it, it's not his. But other days, since it doesn't say lochem that it has to be yours, if you borrow it, it's kosher. And since if you borrow it, it's kosher, so you can also fulfill your obligation if it's stolen. And that's the Rambam says in Perek Ches Halacha Tes, that you can fulfill your obligation with a stolen esrog in the other days, because when he asked on Shmuel, Rashi explained, and since Rashi is from the Achronim Amorim, that it's lacking in lochem, therefore the halacha is accords with Rav Ashi. He has a Mishnah questions. Only if it's stolen it's posel, because mitzvah ba'avera, is it's possible even after Yush. But if it's because of Lochem, it's not possible after Yush because he already acquired it, and therefore it's his. And you acquire and do the mitzvah at the same time. It's called Lochem. Why does Rambam say therefore that after Yush you do not fulfill your obligation? And the answer to the Rambam is the opinion that Yush, without a change of name or a change of doing something to make a difference, does not acquire it. And since it was stolen the first day, it's possible because of Lachem. Certainly after the Yush, it's possible because he did not acquire the Lulav. He already used it on the first day. According to the Maggid Mishnah, if it's stolen even after Yush, it's possible because mitzvah haba ba'avera, because the mitzvah it comes to be from a sin, and it's possible the other days as well. According to the case of Mishnah, the Rambam is only saying it's not valid only on the first day because he didn't acquire it, but on the other days he would be yotzeh. Rae Gann explains that even after Yush, that's talking about, it means that the Baalim heard. They said that they heard the Baalim say, "Vai lo lechason kis." Look what I lost. But usually you would acquire. But here we're afraid of mitzvah boba avera, and he brings from Medrash Rabbah that if a person takes a lulav to appease his master, and the lulav says, "I am stolen. I'm stolen." The Amalekam say, "Oi, woe is to that person that his defender is becoming his prosecutor." Like the Maggid Mishnah, who says because of mitzvah boba avera. Rae Gann concludes that Hoda and Lochem is only on the first day and not the other days, because there it's only Drabonim. The Lechem Mishnah wants to say like the Kesef Mishnah, and he adds that the Rambam explains that Shmuel's the opinion that mitzvah boba avera is only on the first day, like a kohen that after years is supposed to be mitzvah boba avera. But the other days, even though in the Mikdash taking the lulav is deraisa, still it's different than a kohen. The lulav yotzeh with a borrowed one, and in other things that are make it invalid, like Yovish, but the Korban is different. Therefore, Belulav, we're not afraid of mitzvah bava avera because it's not the same exactly as a Korban. And this is what the Maggid Mishnah, when he says, the Gemara says that even though it's forbidden, that even though it's not clear in the Gemara that goes after Yush is possible, still, the Maggid Mishnah is of the opinion it's possible because mitzvah bava avera, that it's only in the first day, but not in the other days. The Rambam continues, if one of the four species shall avodah zorah, or from avodah zorah yiter, he should not take it. L'chatchila for the mitzvah, him notal, but if he did take it, he was yotzeh. The Maggid Mishnah cites Sukkah 31b, that if it's from a tree called an asherah, which is an idol worship tree, is possible. We get more questions from Rambam. A lulav avodah zorah, you shouldn't take it, but if you took it, it's kosher. And the answer, there it's an asherah de Moshe. That there it's talking about a tree that was worshipped from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, which no longer, when something has to be destroyed, it's lacking in measure, and therefore a lulav has to be at least 4 tefachim. You don't have that here. You don't have anything. There's no measure, because it says like yanidachas, but yanidachas everything has to be destroyed because it has no measure. So too, however, a lulav of other avodah zorah, it's only to begin with you shouldn't take it, but if you took it, you yotzeh, and he points out that the Rif doesn't mention it. Asherah, and also the spoils of a city that has to be destroyed, are lacking in shiur because it's supposed to be burnt. And since the lulav needs 4 tefachim, the hodas are over 3 tefachim, the esrog has to be kebeya, and they're considered lacking and divided up. Therefore, b'diavad apostle. But other avodah zorah, that there's no obligation to burn them. They have to be destroyed but not burned. If you took from the lulav yotzeh, the Gemara explains that it's called asherah de Moshe because according to the most meforshim, it means that it was extant in Eretz Yisrael at the time that it came in, because usually something which was attached to the ground of a Jew, nobody else can make it forbade it. You can't forbade somebody else's thing. But since before we went into Eretz Yisrael, it was the Goyim's land, therefore it's considered a Avodah Zarah that we received as part of the spoil of Eretz Yisrael, and it becomes Avodah Zarah of Yisrael. And every Avodah Zarah that Yisrael takes, you can never nullify it. However, an Asher of a Goy is like any Avodah Zarah that if you take it with the Avodah Yoytze, because he can nullify it. There's no difference between Asherah to other Avodah Zarahs of a Goy. Only the Asherah that's mentioned in the Gemara, this tree that was worshipped before we came into Eretz Yisrael and became Jewish Avodah Zarah by conquest. Therefore, other Avodah Zarah is maybe taken with the Eved, but to begin with, we shouldn't take it. The Magen Mishnah explains, even those who say that Avodah Zarah of a Goy, so that's only in the other days, but not the first day, because you need lochem. It has to be yours. And when you're taking the full meaning from Avodah Zarah of a Goy on the first day, you don't have kavona of lochem. It becomes his. Avodah Zarah shekona Yisrael would never become bottled. With the Avodah Zarah shel Goy, you yoytze only from the second day and on, just like you would in something that's borrowed. It doesn't have to be yours. It has to be the species. In Hilchos Shofar, he writes, you can't blow in a shofar of Avodah Zarah. If you blow your yoytze, you fulfill your obligation. And if you blow in a shofar of Yanidas, you do not fulfill your obligation. In Hilchos Avodah Zarah, he explains why. The Magen Mishnah points out that the Rambam codifies the Halacha that the four minim that he took from Asherah, Avodah Zarah, Avdua, that they served it, even though the Goy nullified it from serving it, even then it's possible. The Lulav, Avodah Zarah, he says, Yotze b'di'evet. He doesn't make a difference between a Goy or a Jew. Now, with Avodah Zarah, he says that if a Goy there's bittul, and in Yisrael there is no bittul. The Rambam learns in the Gemara, you do not fulfill your obligation because it is made specifically for Avodah Zarah. It was planted. And Asherah the Moshe that's mentioned in the Torah is talking about any tree that was planted to be Avodah Zarah. Like we find in Avodah Zarah, a tree that was planted for that purpose is also Noah. That's the Asherah that's mentioned in the Torah. Therefore, it's possible because mitzvah haba ba'avera. However, other Avodah Zarah, that you can nullify them, and you can nullify them. But still, even though he says this answer, he remains with, it needs further thought. Now, we can understand if he nullified the Asherah afterwards, it's still possible. But he doesn't, because it was planted for that purpose, but he doesn't explain why Avodah Zarah, both of a Goyim and both of Yisrael, if you took it, you fulfill your obligation. As the Mishnah cites that the Magen Mishnah had a different text in the Gemara, and this is a text that we don't have, we can't say it, and even if there is such a text, that's only according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's Poisel Gozel, that he says if you stole it by armed force, it's possible because of mitzvah b'ava avera. Therefore, Asher is also possible. Aval, however, according to Rabbi Yitzchak ben Achmeni, that Gozel is possible because it's lacking in lochem, not because of mitzvah b'ava avera. On the other days, the Torah doesn't require lochem. Is Gozel, according to the Rambam, would be kosher even by lulav of Asherah, it would be yoytze. Because the same thing, even though it's not yours. Since the Rambam Paschal, like Rabbi Yitzchak ben Achmeni, that you are yoytze, we have to comprehend the case of the Magen Mishnah who says you're not yoytze. Furthermore, even those who say mitzvah b'ava avera is possible by other days, like Rabbi Yochanan, and not like Rabbi Yitzchak ben Achmeni, still we have to understand the commentaries that wrote that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you bought species without help of a mitzvah, before the mitzvah, it's not a mitzvah b'ava avera. In other words, if you stole it and acquired it after years before you did the mitzvah, it's no longer mitzvah b'al avera. Rabbi Yochanan says it's possible mitzvah b'al avera only when you didn't acquire it yet, or acquired it where the mitzvah is causing the acquirement. And by Ashera, where you can't say that the mitzvah helps you to the avera because it has nothing to do with his taking it or not. It was planted to be a avodah zarah, an idol. Even according to Rabbi Yochanan, you don't have the mitzvah of mitzvah bo ba'aver because the aver was there anyway. It has nothing to do with you. And even according to that text, those who say there's the psul of mitzvah bo ba'aver by the four minim is by Ashera. They'll explain there is not this does not lack. Kesef Mishnah adds another question. It's more correct to forbid avodah zarah of a goy that he did not nullify it, and certainly of Yisrael that he did not nullify it, rather than Ashera that was nullified, even though it was originally planted to be worshipped. And his intent is that the Maggid Mishnah does not answer why avodah zarah, if he took it, ultimately you would be yoitza. He questions from a brisa in Chulun 89a that lulav and shofar avodah zarah are apostle even after the fact. Rashi, according to Rambam, explains that avodah zarah is lacking in its measurement. And how can the Rambam say by a lulav avodah zarah of Yisrael? How can he really explain that brisa? And he argues further that the Maggid Mishnah doesn't say where his source is that lulav of Ashera that became nullified, you do not fulfill your obligation. The Hilchos Mishnah says, but the Kesef Mishnah understood the intent of the Maggid Mishnah to tell us that avodah zarah of a goy that was not nullified, or avodah zarah of Yisrael, if you took it, you fulfill your obligation. Therefore, he questions him. But that's not so. As the Hilchos Mishnah goes on to say in Hilchos Shofar, it's talking where it wasn't nullified. Kesef Mishnah is of the opinion that according to the Rambam, and lulav and shofar of avodah zarah, before it's nullified, you do not fulfill your obligation, even after the fact, because it's lacking in measurement. And by avodah zarah of a goy, after he nullifies it, since he can nullify it, Rambam says that you shouldn't take it because it was used for a despicable purpose. We you shouldn't blow because again it was used for something that's not correct. However, after the fact it's kosher, because the Rambam says if he took it, it's yotza because the goy nullified it. And it's not talking we're still avodah zarah. And an Ashera that was planted to serve, you do not fulfill your obligation even if you nullify it, because that's what the Gemara says. The Reish Lakish is ensure only if you're permitted to take a lulav from a dekel that he bowed to it, meaning that he planted it and in the end he worshipped it. Rabdim is of the opinion that Ashera that was nullified, you can never fulfill your obligation because it's despicable to be used for a mitzvah. But everyone agrees that if they planted it to serve it, it's also ba'ano, and there, if it hasn't been nullified, would not be permitted to fulfill his obligation. And that's why the halacha is according to that opinion. He cites the Gemara in Sukkah 31b that the question on the Mishnah Shel Ashera v'Shel Adachas Posel, the Ashera and the Adachas Posel from Rava. Rava says a lulav of avodah zarah, if you took it, it's kosher. That if the Mishnah is talking about Ashera before you nullified it, certainly it's possible because you're lacking a measurement. And the Mishnah doesn't tell us anything. It must be talking about after it was nullified. And therefore the question is, why is Rava of the opinion that after bittul it's kosher? And he answers only in a shofar b'diavad yotza. The Mishnah teaches us that Ashera, even after bittul, you're not yotza, since it was planted and grew for that purpose. Because that's the Mishnah is teaching us, because it grew, it was from the beginning, and therefore it never had a shiur, and therefore even if he nullifies it, it doesn't have a shiur. The Gemara proves that we're talking about a shiur that was planted at the beginning for that purpose. Just like Ir Nidachas, there the bittul doesn't help to permit the mitzvah to be done. We're going to Daf Shin Ayin Ches. The Shulchan Aruch says all the dalaminim are posel begozel begonuv if they were stolen or robbed, both before Yush and both after Yush. And Mishnah Berurah explains, it says, "L'kachtam lochem b'yom harishon," you shall take for yourself the first day. And they say at Rash and Sukkah, Mishalachem. And after Yush it's posel, ki Yush does not acquire. And on the first day, you're not yotzim min haTorah. Mechaber continues, but they stole it and they acquired it without mitzvah, before the mitzvah, like he took a lulav and he made it nicer, it's kosher. It was kind of a shinui ma'isa, but he shouldn't make a bracha on it. The Halacha adds, there's no difference if you stole it from Yisrael or from a goy. Someone is possible, you're not yotzim until you pay the owner. And if you stole it and he paid, it's like you find Shai Tshuva Mishnah Berurah that there's a question about it. The Mishnah Berurah explains V'sheyifehu. That means that when he stole it, the lulav wasn't correct, and he corrected it with a shinui, and it helps even on for the first day. And without yush, it's only called lachem when he acquired it. And what you're chayev, the nigzel is only money once you've acquired it. And if there was yush and shini rishus, the same thing would apply. He sold to somebody else. That other person is yotzei, fulfills his obligation, because he acquired it with his change. Because there was yush prior to the change of possession, of place of ownership, not only change in the item itself. The Mechaber says the halacha is you shouldn't make a bracha on it, and my Mishnah Berurah says why? Since it came to his hands begezel, you're mechaber not to make a bracha, because you're mentioning Shem Shemayim. Mechaber also states those who say they were stolen and it's posel only for the gan of the gazlan, but from somebody else's kosher only the other days. And the Mishnah Berurah proves this from here, that the Mechaber feels that if it's stolen or robbed, it's posel in the other days because mitzvah boba avera, both before Yush and after Yush. Therefore, for others, if there's no mitzvah boba avera, it's permitted totally. The Ramah adds, one should be careful that the Jew himself should not cut one of the four minim. Meaning that, let's assume somebody's selling him aravas from a tree, and he doesn't know who owns the land. And cat land cannot be stolen. And usually, if we're talking about people who are not reliable, we're talking about goyim, so it could be it came into his hands by stealing. And if he cuts it, he's the one who's stealing it. But rather the goy should cut it. And there's no difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz regarding this point. The Mishnah Berurah explains it's talking about a land of a goy, that one of the minim was there. If the goy will give permission to the Yisrael to cut it, we're afraid that the goy stole the land, and the karka, as we said, cannot be stolen, and therefore it isn't acquired by the gazlan, by the goy, even after yush, and the one who cuts it is now the robber. Therefore, you should make sure you shouldn't do it yourself, but the goy should do it for you. And then you have yush and shini rishus. Shini balam, the Yisrael takes it afterwards from the goy. So shini rishus in the hands of the Yisrael. The Mechaber continues. So too in a dachas and asher of Yisrael is posel, but avoid yichom lechatchilo, to begin with, one should not take it. If you did take it on the first day, when you don't need lachem, it would be kosher. Mishnah Berurah explains, the dachas has to be burnt. Therefore, there is no measure to it, and therefore it's posel other days as well. Asherah is a tree that they serve, and the Lulav grew in it before it was worshipped. It's mutter to the individual, but you shouldn't use it for shamayim because you took it after it was worshipped already, even though it grew before. And the food that grew after it was worshipped is also even for a private person to have anor, like we find in the Shulchan Aruch here there. I mean, it's possible even if the other days. Even if the shiur was belonging to a Jew, then it doesn't, for sure it's forbidden because a Jew cannot nullify avodah zarah that he has. Anything has to be burnt, it's like it's burnt and it doesn't have a measure. But when the shiur is of a goy, you shouldn't take it. Even the goy will nullify it by giving it away to you. But that's only good for you, but not for shamayim. And anything keeping a mitzvah is considered shamayim, and this would be considered denigrated or unusable for a mitzvah. However, if you did take it, you fulfilled your obligation, even if he bought it, the guy didn't nullify it. It's still also al since the bittul that he nullified it from being his permit, and therefore it's no longer, obviously he doesn't consider it God. It's not. It doesn't have to be burnt, and therefore by taking it, you fulfill the mitzvah because you don't benefit from it. Even though it's also no, doing a mitzvah is not considered benefiting from something because mitzvahs weren't given to us to benefit therefrom. The Rambam adds that you can fulfill your obligation only when you had no intention to acquire it. If you intended to acquire it, then it becomes the avodah zarah of a Jew, and therefore he would not fulfill his obligation. Only if the goy nullified it before he gave it to him. Then, even if he wants to acquire it, he fulfills his obligation because it's no longer avodah zarah. Just that one should, to begin with, one should not use such a lulav. Hayakomush, if it was dried, kosher, but it's not totally dry. It's kosher. That's what the Rambam says. The Maggid Mishnah cites Sukkah 31. If they're all dried, ksherim. It has komush means not without any wetness, but it's dry. And yovish means that there's no wetness in it at all. It's like a piece of wood, and it becomes totally white, and that's what it means. B'shas hadchak, when there's no other possibility, or b'shas hasakona, when you couldn't go out and buy new ones, and you only have your old one, lulav hayovish kosher. The old one is kosher, avaloi sha'aminim, but this does not apply to the other species. The Maggid Mishnah cites a Mishnah in Sukkah 31a, that old lulav is possible. Yudah permits it to be used, and there was a place called Karkum that they didn't have lulavim, and therefore they definitely became dried out, and they used to inherit it to their children. So this he shows that lulav that's dried out completely is kosher. So they said, no, that's not an usual situation. They didn't have anything else. And the Rambam explains it was taken even the first take. Rae Gann adds, even though Chacham disagree and they say that you cannot use it because only in a situation where there's no other possibility, but if there's a place where you can get a fresh one, you can't use it. But it would seem that when there's no other possibility, you can even make a brocha. The Maggid Mishnah cites that the Goinim relied that you can fulfill your obligation even if the head of the lulav is chopped off, and everything else that nullifies a lulav on the first, because if you can use a dry one, it is no worse when you have no other choice. The Rambam permits only what the Rabbi Yehuda says, lulav yovish. That's the ikar, not the other species. The Rebbe disagrees. Amar Avram. Rebbe says, Ani eini oimakein. I do not agree with this. Shari Omer, we learned the Sukkah 29b. Yovish is posel, and where it says posel, even after the fact it's posel, and it's minatorah, it's posel. Everything that's minatorah posel, doesn't matter whether you have no other choice. And when they told the Chacham said Rabbi Yehuda Ein Shas Adchak Raya, that in times of no other possibility is not a proof. Kach Amru, this is what they meant to say, that they took it just to show that they had an obligation. This is only so that people shouldn't forget there are 4 species. And Rabbi Yehuda himself did not say, other than that they inherited it to their children. He did not say that they made a blessing on it. And this inheritance was done because they did not have lulav, and not to keep the mitzvah and to make a brocha, only that they shouldn't forget Torah's lulav. The Magen Mishnah cites that the Rambam answered that you can't say that Rabbi Yehuda brings a raya from Yerusha alone, because every inheritance continues throughout the generations, and if there's no son, it goes to the grandchildren. And it's obvious that they inherited it, the lulav, like any other asset, and maybe they gave it over, it says, to inherit, to make from it, use it for purposes other than a lulav. Rabbi points out that lulav yovish is kosher from Anshe Kalkum, that their grandchildren use these lulav on the sukkahs, even though they were very definitely dry. And the Chacham said that it was a time of tchak, when they had no other choice, and they could not find any fresh lulavim. But the question arises that the Ravid says posel means that it's even after the fact. Now, Machon Nesher wants to answer that even according to the Rambam, if you would have another lulav that's not dry, they did not permit to make a brocha on a dry one. And if he took it when he had the opportunity to have a fresh, and he made a brocha, he did not fulfill his obligation. He has to take a fresh one. And therefore, the Mishnah says lulav hayovish posel means when you have an opportunity to have a fresh one. Rosh Maimonides learns from this incident by Anshe Karchum to permit even a hodas dry one if you have no other choice, not only a lulav like the Rambam. Rabbi Menel says only if it's dry it's kosher when you have no other choice. But if the top is chopped off, even when you have no other choice, you don't make a brocha because it's not called hodah. Meaning a complete dry lulav is better than a fresh lulav that's maimed. And the Yerushalmi brings down that if it's dry, it's posel, because it says le'amesim yihal luko, because it's considered something that's dead. And we learned b'shem Rabbi Yehuda the yovish is kosher. So they asked our Rav, what's the difference between chopped off to being dried? This one is nice looking, the other one isn't. Rabbi Menel learns from there that if the head of the lulav is chopped off, it's posel. Rabbi Menel explains that this rule of dryness does not apply to the other species, because when they dry, they fall apart. And esrig, that is also posel, because it says hoda, and you don't give a matona to a ruler a dried esrig. And lulav that's dried is posel the first days, but the other days it's kosher, because he doesn't need hoda. The others say that all the minim in the time of a sakona, you fulfill your obligation. When there's danger with the dry one, you can make it a brocha on it, like the Bnei Karchum, but this doesn't seem logical. The Shulchan Aruch paskins in 649 that in times of distress, that they don't have anything that's kosher, everything that's posel, you can take them, but you can't make a brocha. The Mishnah Berurah says you can even take it on the first day, so that you shouldn't forget that there's an obligation to take a lulav, but you don't make a brocha, because that's only a commemoration, and this action with dry ones is not an actual fulfillment of the mitzvah, and therefore you can't make a bracha. There are more sites. There are those who say that a lulav is kosher if it's dried, even to make a bracha, and that's the minig, to make a bracha even when there are others that are fresh. Mishnah Berurah cites the Rambam that you shouldn't use a dry, by the other species, dried willows or myrtles or esrogim. In Sha'ar HaTziyun, he cites that the reason that lulav, even though it's dry, it retains its original stature. And lulav has a certain character to it, even when it's dry, which is not the same by the other minim that they fall apart. And the esrog is totally dry. It doesn't look like a fruit. The Mishnah Berurah goes on to explain the remote that you make a bracha on dried lulavim, even when you have fresh ones. That they're talking about these countries that you don't have totally fresh lulavim. The dry ones aren't totally dry either. Therefore, there's not a greater difference between the dried and the fresh. And therefore you make a bracha on whatever you have, which is yours. Before that he writes that if his friend has all the species kosher, it's not called shasat chak, he should go ahead and make a bracha on his friends if his friend will give it to him. And then he should use his own to shake, if he cannot do so with that of his friend, because not everyone can use the lulavim at the same time. The Rambam adds that by the other species, you don't take dry ones, and there are those who are lenient, even by a hodis that's dry, a myrtle twig. The Mishnah Berurah explains not every place do you find fresh myrtle twigs, but aravis, willows, you find everywhere. Therefore, you never fulfill your obligation with dried willows. And esrog, they didn't want to be lenient, because it says in the Torah, pre-eitz hoda. The minig, the people use a dried lulav. The Rambam says you can rely on it b'shasat chak when it's at times are difficult. The Mishnah Berurah cites later commentaries that agree to this, that in times of difficulty you can rely on those who have the opinion that every min you can make a bracha on the dried ones. And it brings 4 differences. If there's none of that city, all the 4 minim are taken dry, you can make a bracha. 2, if there are dry ones and there are others have fresh ones, you should make the bracha on the fresh ones, and you're not yotzer, you do not fulfill your mitzvah even with the dried ones. In those lands where you don't find fresh, totally fresh, like this would be down south, I guess, when the date trees are in the time of Sukkah, they're old already, and the dried ones are not totally dry. You can make a bracha on a lulav that's dried, even to begin with. In a place that others have fresh ones, you shouldn't make a bracha on the dried ones, even though they're not totally dried. And if he did make a bracha, he should take the other ones without a bracha, because he may have already fulfilled his obligation. The bracha would be a bracha levatol.